I'm Arabella, 27 female. I live in a city apartment that I'm proud of, one I secured through years of relentless work in my field as a forensic accountant. My life is a carefully balanced ledger of income, expenses, and the slow, grinding repayment of my student debt. A debt I thought was a shared family investment in my future. It turns out, my family's accounting methods were far more creative and fraudulent than I could have ever imagined. This is the story of how I discovered their betrayal and used my very specific set of skills to audit their lies and reclaim what was mine. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. In my family, there were always two distinct roles, unspoken but rigidly enforced. My younger brother, Julian, was the golden child. I was the burden. It wasn't something that was ever said out loud, of course. My parents, Marcus and Isabel, were masters of plausible deniability. They draped their favoritism in the language of practicality and circumstance. Julian, they'd say, was just more of a people person, naturally charming, someone who things came easily to. I, on the other hand, was the focused one, the academic, a girl who had to work twice as hard for everything. They framed it as a compliment, a testament to my work ethic. But I always understood the subtext. Julian was an asset, and I was a long-term, high-cost investment with questionable returns. My father, Marcus, sold insurance. He could quantify risk in any situation and spent my childhood advising me on the safest paths. The safest college major, the safest career choice, the safest way to invest my meager savings from part-time jobs. My mother, Isabel, was a real estate agent who valued curb appeal above all else, both for houses and for her children. Julian, with his easy smile and effortless charisma, had curb appeal in spades. He was the face of the family, the one whose achievements were plastered all over my mother's social media. His marketing degree was celebrated as a perfect fit for his personality. My degree in forensic accounting, however, was treated like a strange, dusty hobby. Well, someone has to do it, my dad would chuckle at family gatherings, as if I'd chosen to be a chimney sweep. This dynamic was never more apparent than when it came to our education. I chose a difficult, expensive program at a prestigious university because it was the best in its field. My parents agreed to help, but the terms were laid out like a business contract. They would take out Parent Plus loans in their name, and I would be responsible for paying them back, with interest, as soon as I graduated. It was presented as a lesson in responsibility. "This will teach you the value of money, Arabella," Marcus had said, signing the papers with a solemn air. "Nothing in life is free." I accepted this, believing it was fair. I worked multiple jobs through college, scrimped and saved, and graduated with honors, proud of the responsibility I was shouldering. For the last 5 years, I had been making those payments. Every single month, a significant chunk of my salary was transferred to my parents' account. It was a heavy weight, one that dictated every financial decision I made. I lived with roommates for years longer than I wanted to, drove a 10-year-old car, and thought of vacations as an impossible luxury. Meanwhile, Julian breezed through a state school, living at home. His experience was a 4-year-long party, dotted with occasional classes. My parents covered his car, his insurance, his phone bill, and his social expenses. When I gently pointed out the disparity, my mother had a ready answer. "He needs to focus on his networking, honey. That's how his industry works. Your path was different. You needed to build discipline." My boyfriend, Sam, saw it for what it was. He was the calm, logical force in my life, a software developer who viewed problems as bugs in a system that needed to be fixed. He often questioned the arrangement. "Are you sure they're not charging you more interest than the loan actually has?" he'd asked once, earning a sharp, defensive response from me. "They're my parents, Sam. They wouldn't do that." I defended them because the alternative, that my parents were actively profiting from my debt, was too painful to consider. I needed to believe in their good intentions, even if their actions felt cold. I needed to believe that the burden I was carrying was for my own good, a character-building exercise that Julian, in his golden glow, simply didn't need. The expectation was clear. Julian would succeed through charm, and I would succeed through sheer, grinding effort. My debt was the engine of that effort. It kept me hungry, kept me working late, kept me poring over spreadsheets and financial statements until my eyes blurred. My job was my life because it had to be. It was the only way to pay for the privilege of having a good education. My parents praised my dedication, holding me up as an example of hard work, all while ensuring Julian never had to break a sweat. They created the imbalance and then praised me for managing to walk the tightrope they had strung up for me, while Julian was given a safety net woven from gold. This was the setup, the foundation of our family's carefully constructed lie. And for years, I never thought to question the integrity of the architects. The bomb detonated on a Sunday afternoon. My parents had insisted on a family dinner to celebrate Julian's graduation. The air in their meticulously clean, beige-toned house was thick with forced festivity. Julian was glowing, soaking in the praise my parents lavished on him for completing his marketing degree with what they generously called solid grades. I sat beside Sam, nursing a glass of water, trying to paste a convincing smile on my face. I was happy for my brother, I truly was, but the blatant favoritism was a bitter pill to swallow. "We have one more surprise for you, champ," my dad announced, his voice booming with pride. He and my mom exchanged a look, the kind of conspiratorial saccharine smile that always set my teeth on edge. My mom disappeared into the study and returned with a large, gift-wrapped frame. Julian unwrapped it with performative excitement, his eyes widening as he saw the contents. He held it up for me and Sam to see. It was a customized print, designed to look like a diploma, with elegant calligraphy. It read, Julian last name, Bachelor of Marketing, all tuition and fees paid in full. A graduation gift from Mom and Dad. My heart stopped, paid in full. They had paid his entire tuition. Not loans he had to repay, not a shared responsibility. A gift, an outright no-strings-attached gift. The room fell silent for a moment as the weight of the announcement settled. Julian was ecstatic, hugging my mom and shaking my dad's hand, thanking them profusely. I just stared at the frame, the words blurring in front of my eyes. A wave of nausea washed over me. I thought of the payment I had just made 3 days earlier. A payment on my own student loans, sent directly to my parents. "Wow," Sam said, his voice carefully neutral. He squeezed my hand under the table, a silent anchor in my swirling sea of shock and hurt. "That's an incredible gift." "He deserved it," my mother said, beaming at Julian. "He worked hard and made us proud. We wanted him to start his career fresh, with no debt holding him back." The implication was a slap in the face. I, who had graduated with a 3.9 GPA from a top-tier program, who worked 60-hour weeks, was not deserving of a fresh start. My debt, it seemed, was not a hindrance but a necessity. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. I felt my composure cracking, the carefully constructed wall I'd built around my resentment beginning to crumble. I needed air. "Excuse me," I mumbled, standing up so quickly my chair scraped against the hardwood floor. "I just need a moment." I escaped to the back porch, breathing in the cool evening air, my hands shaking. Sam followed me out a few moments later, closing the sliding glass door behind him. He didn't say anything, just stood beside me, his presence a quiet comfort. But the betrayal was too raw, too loud in my head. They had watched me struggle for 5 years. They had cashed every check, accepted every bank transfer, knowing they had given my brother the very freedom they were denying me. Before I could process the gift, the other shoe dropped. My father came out onto the porch, a concerned look on his face that I knew was pure performance. "Are you all right, Arabella?" he asked. "You seem upset." "I'm fine," I said, my voice tight. "Good," he said, clearly not interested in my actual feelings. "Because your mother and I need to talk to you about something. We were looking at the loan statements." My stomach clenched. "The interest rates have gone up a bit, and we think it's time to increase your monthly payments. Just to make sure we stay on schedule, we were thinking another $200 a month should cover it." I turned to face him, my shock curdling into a hot, white rage. They had just announced they'd given Julian a gift worth tens of thousands of dollars, and in the same breath, they were demanding more money from me. The audacity was stunning. "You can't be serious," I whispered, the words barely audible. "It's about responsibility, honey," my mom said, joining us on the porch. Her smile was gone, replaced by a look of stern disappointment, as if I were the one being unreasonable. "We're just trying to be prudent. You understand finances." That was it, the breaking point. The moment the carefully balanced ledger in my mind finally tipped, spilling red ink everywhere. They weren't just favoring my brother, they were actively using me. I was the F. Amy Lee cash cow, the reliable source of income that funded their generosity towards the golden child. My burden wasn't a character-building exercise. It was a line item in their budget. The gift for him was being paid for by the bill they handed to me. The betrayal wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about the lie I had been living for my entire life. The argument that followed was ugly. It was the culmination of 27 years of suppressed resentment, of feeling second best, of carrying a weight my brother was never asked to even touch. Voices were raised, and for the first time in my life, I didn't back down. I threw their hypocrisy in their faces. "How can you stand there and ask me for more money seconds after you announced you paid for all of Julian's school?" I demanded, my voice shaking with a fury I hadn't realized I possessed. "Do you have any idea how insulting that is?" My mother, Isabel, immediately went on the defensive, her tone shifting from maternal concern to wounded martyr. "This isn't about Julian," she said, her hand fluttering to her chest. "This is about your agreement. We supported you through a very expensive education, Arabella. We took a risk on you. This is what you agreed to." "A risk?" I laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. "I graduated with honors and have been employed in a high-demand field since the day I left. Julian spent 4 years partying and barely scraped by. Who was the real risk here?" My father, Marcus, stepped forward, his expression hardening. He hated being challenged. "That's enough," he said, his voice low and threatening. "You're being ungrateful. We gave you the opportunity of a lifetime, and we expect you to hold up your end of the bargain. The payments need to increase starting next month. That's final." Tears were streaming down my face now, hot and angry. They weren't tears of sadness, but of pure, undiluted rage. It was the unfairness of it all. The years of sacrifice, the late nights studying, the constant financial anxiety, all of it felt like a punishment, not an opportunity. Sam tried to intervene, putting a calming hand on my arm. "Maybe we should all just take a step back," he started, but my father cut him off. "This is a family matter, Sam," he snapped. "I am her family too," Sam retorted, his own voice hardening. The scene was dissolving into chaos. Julian had emerged from the house, looking uncomfortable. "Come on, guys, let's not fight," he said weakly, the beneficiary of the entire conflict wanting it to just go away. "Stay out of this, Julian," I yelled, turning on him. "This has everything to do with you." My mother started crying then, claiming I was tearing the family apart. It was their classic move: create a problem and then blame me for reacting to it. They were gaslighting me, trying to paint me as the hysterical, ungrateful daughter. And through the haze of my tears and the ringing in my ears, a memory surfaced. It was a small, insignificant thing I hadn't thought about in years, a tiny detail from a long-forgotten conversation. It came to me with the sudden, shocking clarity of a lightning strike. I was a sophomore in college, home for winter break. My dad was working on their taxes at the dining room table, muttering about deductions and credits. I had asked him naively if I should be filing my own taxes since I was working a part-time job. He had waved a dismissive hand. "Don't worry about it," he'd said. "As long as we're paying for your education and you're our dependent, we handle all of that. We get a tax credit for your tuition. It helps us offset the cost of the loans." The American opportunity tax credit. My blood ran cold. I was a forensic accountant. I knew tax law. I knew the rules for that credit inside and out. To claim the AOTC, the filer has to be the one who actually paid the tuition expenses. If the student is not claimed as a dependent, they are the only one who can claim the credit. If they are claimed as a dependent, the parent who claims them can take the credit. My parents had claimed me as a dependent all through college. But here was the crucial detail, the one that made my breath catch in my throat. The person who claims the credit must be the one legally obligated to pay the expense. My parents had taken out the Parent Plus loans. The legal obligation was theirs, but I was the one paying them back. I was the one footing the bill. The money was just passing through their account. More importantly, the IRS has strict rules. If a student is paying the loans for their own education and they are not claimed as a dependent, they are the one entitled to claim any related tax benefits. After my first 2 years, I was earning enough that I shouldn't have been their dependent anymore. I remembered filing my own simple returns for my part-time jobs, always checking the box that said, someone can claim me as a dependent, because they told me to. They hadn't just gotten a credit to owe. FF set the cost. They had claimed a credit for expenses they weren't actually paying. For 4 years, they had likely received thousands of dollars back from the government, money that legally and ethically should have been mine. This wasn't just favoritism anymore. This wasn't just unfairness. This was fraud. They had been stealing from me and from the government for years. The tears stopped. The rage in my chest cooled and hardened into something sharp and precise. The game had just changed. The drive home was silent. Sam knew me well enough to understand that my sudden quiet was not a sign of defeat, but of calculation. My mind was racing, replaying years of conversations, re-examining documents I had signed without a second thought, and connecting dots that had been hiding in plain sight. The forensic accountant in me had taken over. The emotional, wounded daughter was locked away, replaced by a cold, methodical investigator. The case file was open, and the subjects were my own parents. When we got back to my apartment, I didn't even take off my coat. I went straight to my home office, a small room filled with textbooks, binders, and 2 large monitors. "What are you looking for?" Sam asked gently, leaning against the doorframe. "My old tax returns," I said, my fingers flying across the keyboard as I logged into the online tax software I had used for the past decade. "And the original loan agreements." I spent the next 2 hours in a state of intense focus. I pulled up my tax returns from every year I was in college. As I suspected, for all 4 years, I had checked the box indicating I could be claimed as a dependent. I had filed a 1040 EZ, reporting only my meager income from campus jobs and summer internships. It was the return of a student, not an independent adult. Next, I needed their returns. Getting them would be the tricky part. But then I remembered. 2 years ago, my father's laptop had crashed, and he'd called me in a panic. I had helped him set up a new one and in the process, created a cloud backup for all his important files, including his financial records. He was not tech-savvy. I knew he would have never changed the password I set for him. My hands trembled slightly as I navigated to the cloud storage service. I typed in the password, his dog's name and the year he was born. Access granted. A knot of guilt twisted in my stomach, but I pushed it down. They had forfeited their right to privacy the moment they decided to defraud me. I found the folder labeled Taxes and opened it. Inside were neatly scanned PDFs of their tax returns for the past 15 years. I downloaded the 4 relevant years, my heart pounding in my chest. I opened their 1040 from my freshman year and went straight to the section for education credits. There it was in black and white. Form 8863, Education Credits, American Opportunity and Lifetime Learning Credits. They had claimed the maximum American Opportunity Tax Credit, $2,500. They did the same for my sophomore, junior, and senior years. A total of $10,000. But that was only the beginning. The AOTC is partially refundable, meaning even if they didn't owe any taxes, they could get up to 40% of the credit back in cash. With their joint income as small business owners, it was likely they received a significant portion of that money as a direct refund from the IRS. This wasn't just a reduction in their tax liability. This was cash in their pocket. Cash that was generated by tuition costs that I was paying. The rage returned, cold and sharp. I cross-referenced the dates of their filings with my bank statements. I could see the pattern. They would receive their tax refund in February or March, and shortly after, there would be a big-ticket purchase. A new patio set one year, a cruise to the Caribbean the next. They had used the money they stole from me to fund their lifestyle, all while telling me to be more responsible and disciplined with my finances. The final piece of the puzzle was the loan agreement. I had a digital copy saved in my own cloud drive. I read through the fine print of the Parent Plus loan. The language was clear. The loan was in my father's name. The legal liability was his. However, I also found the informal repayment agreement we had signed. It was a simple document my dad had typed up, stating that I, Arabella, would be responsible for making monthly payments to him to cover the loan's principal and interest. It was not a legally binding contract in the eyes of the government or the loan provider, but it was the tool my parents had used to enforce my servitude. I now had everything I needed. Their tax returns showing the illegally claimed credits, my tax returns showing I was filed as a dependent, my bank statements showing a consistent 5-year history of me paying for the loans, and the loan agreement itself. It was an open and shut case of tax fraud. According to IRS regulations, if they were audited, they would be liable. For the full $10,000 in back taxes, plus penalties and interest, which after several years could easily double the amount. Sam came into the room and placed a mug of tea on my desk. He looked at the screen, where I had their tax return displayed next to mine. He didn't need me to explain. "Oh, Arabella," he breathed, his voice a mixture of anger and sadness. "I am so sorry." "Don't be," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. I took a sip of the tea, the warmth doing nothing to thaw the ice in my veins. They made a critical error. They underestimated their opponent. They thought I was just their daughter. They forgot I'm a forensic accountant. I looked at the mountain of evidence on my screen. This was no longer just a family dispute. It was a professional engagement, and I was about to conduct the most important audit of my life. For the next week, I was a ghost. I answered my parents' calls with brief, non-committal texts. Busy at work became my shield. They were likely confused, expecting me to have cooled down and come around to their way of thinking. They had no idea a storm was gathering, and I was meticulously planning its trajectory. My grief had been processed and filed away. Now, it was time for strategy. I didn't want to destroy them. As much as they had hurt me, the thought of turning my own parents over to the IRS and potentially bankrupting them, or, in a worst-case scenario, seeing them face criminal charges, was a line I wasn't sure I wanted to cross. My goal wasn't annihilation. It was justice. It was about rebalancing a ledger that had been skewed in their favor for my entire life. I needed to create a proposal they couldn't refuse, one where the alternative was so catastrophic that they would have no choice but to accept my terms. My first step was to quantify the damage. I created a detailed spreadsheet, a document so thorough and professionally formatted it could have been submitted as evidence in a court of law. Column A, the total amount of my student loans, principal, and interest. It came to roughly $85,000. Column B, the total payments I had made to my parents over the past 5 years. That figure was $36,400. Column C, the total amount of the illegally claimed American Opportunity tax credits, $10,000. Column D, I went a step further. I calculated the interest I could have earned on that $10,000 if it had been properly mine and invested conservatively over the years. I even calculated the tax benefits I had lost by not being able to claim the student loan interest deduction for myself, as the loan wasn't in my name. The total of these lost financial opportunities was another $4,500. Column E, finally, I calculated the potential penalties my parents would face if they were audited by the IRS. A 20% accuracy-related penalty on the owed amount was standard. Then there was interest on the underpayment, compounded daily. I ran a conservative estimate. The total liability to the IRS would be, at a minimum, $17,000 and likely much more. The grand total of their financial deception was staggering. They had benefited directly and indirectly to the tune of nearly $15,000, while their potential legal liability was even higher. And all of this was set against the backdrop of the $60,000 gift they had just given Julian, a gift likely subsidized by my payments and their fraudulent tax refunds. With the numbers laid out, I drafted my terms. It was a contract, clear and emotionless. I called it a familial financial reconciliation agreement. The terms were as follows. Immediate cessation of payments. My monthly payments to them would stop, effective immediately. Loan forgiveness. The remaining debt I owed them on the Parent Plus loans, approximately $48,600, was to be officially forgiven. They would assume full and sole responsibility for the remainder of the loan, as was legally required. Repayment of stolen funds. They would repay me the $10,000 from the tax credits they had claimed illegally, plus the $4,500 in lost opportunity costs, for a total of $14,500. Payment schedule. This repayment would be made in 12 equal monthly installments, starting on the first of the following month. A direct deposit into my bank account. Non-disclosure. In exchange for their agreement to these terms, I would not report their tax fraud to the Internal Revenue Service. I would maintain complete silence on the matter. Default clause. If they missed a single payment or violated any term of the agreement, the non-disclosure clause would become null and void. I would be free to submit my meticulously compiled evidence to the IRS at my discretion. Sam read the document over my shoulder, his eyes wide. "This is intense, Arabella," he said. "It's blackmail." "It's not blackmail, Sam," I corrected him calmly. "Blackmail is using a threat to get something you're not entitled to. I am entitled to every single penny outlined in this document. This is a settlement offer. It's the cost of my silence. They can choose to accept it, or they can choose to deal with the IRS. It's their decision." I printed 2 copies of the agreement and placed them in a professional-looking portfolio. I also compiled a separate evidence binder. It contained copies of their tax returns with the fraudulent credits highlighted, copies of my returns, the loan agreements, and a full printout of my spreadsheet, complete with footnotes citing the relevant sections of the U.S. tax code. This binder was my leverage. It was the gun on the table. The final step was to arrange the meeting. I sent a simple text to my parents and Julian. "We need to have a family meeting to discuss my financial future and the student loans. Please be at my apartment this Sunday at 2 p.m. It's very important that everyone is there." My mother replied almost instantly, "Of course, dear, we'd be happy to clear things up." I smiled grimly at my phone. They had no idea what was coming. They thought they were walking into an emotional appeal from their hysterical daughter. They were about to walk into a formal audit conducted by a professional they had created but never truly known. The price had been calculated. It was time for them to pay it. They arrived at my apartment at precisely 2 p.m. on Sunday. They brought with them an air of patronizing authority, as if they were benevolent rulers visiting a disgruntled subject in the provinces. My father, Marcus, carried a bottle of mid-range wine, a classic peace offering. My mother, Isabel, had a look of pained concern on her face, the one she wore when she was about to lecture me for my own good. Julian trailed behind them, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else on earth. I didn't offer them the wine. I directed them to sit at my small dining table, which I had cleared of everything except for 4 glasses of water and 2 neatly stacked folders in the center. Sam was in the bedroom, instructed to stay out of sight unless I called for him. This was my audit, and I would be leading it alone. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice even and calm. I remained standing, a deliberate choice to control the room. "I've given a lot of thought to our conversation last week, and I've reviewed my financial situation in detail. I've prepared a document that I believe will resolve our disagreement permanently." My father chuckled, taking a sip of water. "Arabella, there's no need for all this formality. If you need a little help with the increased payment, we can discuss it, but your responsibility to the loan remains." "Actually," I said, sliding the top folder across the table towards him, That's the primary subject of this meeting. Please open it. He exchanged a look with my mother, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes. He opened the folder. Inside was the document titled Familial Financial Reconciliation Agreement. He began to read, his brow furrowed in confusion. My mother leaned over his shoulder to read with him. I watched as their expressions shifted. Confusion gave way to disbelief, then to outrage. "What is this?" my mother gasped, snatching the papers from my father. "Loan forgiveness? You're demanding we pay you $14,500. Is this a joke?" Julian, who had been staring at his phone, looked up, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. "What's going on?" "Your sister has lost her mind," my father snarled, his face turning a blotchy red. He stood up, slamming his hand on the table. "This is absurd. You have no right to demand any of this. You owe us that money, Arabella. We have an agreement." "The agreement we had was based on a lie," I said coolly. I picked up the second, much thicker folder, my evidence binder. I placed it on the table with a soft but definitive thud. "And I have the proof." I opened the binder and turned it around for them to see. The first page was a side-by-side comparison of their tax return from my freshman year and my own, with the American Opportunity Tax credit on their form highlighted in bright yellow. "For 4 years," I began, my voice like ice, "you claimed the American Opportunity Tax credit for my tuition expenses. That credit generated $10,000 for you. However, to legally claim that credit, you must be the one paying the expenses. I was the one paying, through my repayments to you. You knowingly filed fraudulent tax returns for 4 consecutive years. That is a federal crime." The color drained from my father's face. My mother stared at the documents, her mouth opening and closing silently. She looked like a fish out of water. "I have copies of all 4 years of your fraudulent returns," I continued, turning the page. "I have copies of my bank statements, showing every single payment I've made to you. I have a detailed analysis of the lost interest and tax benefits I was denied because of your actions. And I have a very conservative estimate of the penalties and back taxes you would owe the IRS if this information were to find its way to them. It would be significantly more than the $14,500 I am asking for. It would likely be closer to $20,000, not including the legal fees you would incur during the audit." I let the silence hang in the air, thick and heavy. Julian looked from me to his parents, his eyes wide with dawning comprehension. You wouldn't," my mother whispered, her voice trembling. "You wouldn't do that to your own family." "You defrauded your own family," I countered, my voice unwavering. "You built your financial comfort on my back. You used the money you stole from me to fund your lifestyle and to pay for Julian's entire education, and then had the gall to demand even more from me. So yes, I would." My father sank back into his chair, looking defeated. The blustering, authoritative man was gone, replaced by someone who looked his age for the first time. He understood risk, and he was staring at a catastrophic one. "This agreement," I said, tapping the first folder, "is your one and only way out. You agree to my terms, you pay back what you stole, you take responsibility for the rest of your loan, and I remain silent. You refuse, and I will walk out of this apartment tomorrow morning and mail this entire binder to the IRS. The choice is yours. You have 5 minutes to decide." I turned and walked to the window, my back to them, giving them the illusion of privacy to discuss their capitulation. I could hear their frantic, desperate whispers. The power dynamic in our family had just been irrevocably rewritten. The final audit was complete. All that remained was for them to sign the report. The 5 minutes I gave them stretched into 10. The whispering at the table was frantic, a mixture of my mother's tearful protests and my father's grim, pragmatic assessments. Julian said nothing. He was a spectator at the demolition of the family structure that had so benefited him. I stayed by the window, watching the city below, my heart beating a steady, resolute rhythm. I felt no pity, only a profound sense of clarity. Finally, my father's voice, raspy and defeated, broke the silence. "Fine." I turned back to the table. He wouldn't look at me. His eyes were fixed on the agreement, the document that codified his surrender. "We'll sign it," he said. "Both of you," I stated, pulling a pen from my pocket and placing it on the table. It felt like I was closing a multi-million-dollar deal. My mother was sobbing quietly, but she took the pen after my father signed, her signature a shaky, spidery scrawl. I took my copy, signed it myself, and then took theirs to sign as well. I handed their copy back to them. The transaction was complete. "The first payment of $1,208.33 is due on the 1st of next month," I said, my voice purely professional. "You have my account details. Do not be late." They left without another word. My father looked broken. My mother looked at me with a venomous glare, the look of someone whose power had been stripped away. Julian was the last to leave. He paused at the door and looked back at me, his expression unreadable. "I didn't know, Arabella," he said quietly. "It doesn't matter," I replied. It wasn't about whether he knew. It was about a system he had benefited from his entire life, a system that was now dismantled. He nodded slowly and closed the door behind him. The moment the door clicked shut, the strength that had carried me through the confrontation evaporated. My knees felt weak, and I sank onto the couch, the signed agreement clutched in my hand. Sam came out of the bedroom and sat beside me, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. I leaned into him and finally let myself cry. But these were different tears. They weren't tears of anger or hurt, but of release. It was the emotional cost of the audit, the final closing entry in a painful chapter of my life. My parents held up their end of the bargain. They had no choice. The first payment appeared in my bank account on the 1st of the month, as did every subsequent payment for the next year. They never missed a deadline. Our relationship, however, was severed. We didn't speak. Holidays came and went in silence. My mother tried to send a few guilt-ridden texts, which I ignored. My father remained completely silent. The family I had known was gone, but I realized it had never really existed in the first place. It was a business arrangement where I was the only one unaware of the predatory terms. With the financial burden lifted, my life transformed. The money that used to go to my parents now went into my savings, my retirement fund, and a down payment account for a house for me and Sam. We took our first real vacation together 6 months later, a trip to Italy that I paid for with cash. Standing in front of the Colosseum, I felt a sense of freedom I had never experienced before. I was no longer a burdened investment, I was just myself. As for Julian, our relationship entered a strange, new territory. About a month after the meeting, he called me. He apologized. He acknowledged the unfairness he had been blind to for so long and told me he was getting a second job to start paying my parents back for the gift they had given him. It was a start. We began to talk, cautiously at first, building a new relationship, one based not on assigned roles but on mutual respect. A year after the final audit, I received the last payment from my parents. The $14,500 had been returned in full. The Parent Plus loan was now entirely their problem. My ledger was clean. That evening, Sam and I opened a bottle of champagne, a much nicer one than my father had brought to my apartment. "To a clean ledger," Sam said, raising his glass. "And a new life," I replied, clinking my glass against his. My family was broken, but I was whole. I had lost a mother and a father, but I had gained myself. I had learned that sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to conduct a thorough and ruthless audit of your life, write off the toxic assets, and close the books on the past for good.